start with an economic review of how the year has gone. Indeed, we were teasing that report that was supposed to give us a summary of how we fared in the economic year gone by, and that was our correspondent Chimiziobi Wago, a business correspondent, giving us a summary of what happened in the year. But hopefully, perhaps on the news at 10 tonight, you should get the full details of that report. We have joining us here from our Abuja studio, Somkele Awakalu, who is a special assistant to the president on economic research in the office of the vice president. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
And then we also have with us Mr. Shegun Ajayi Kadir, who is the Director General Manufacturers Association of Nigeria as well. Welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Well, what a year 2021 has been. 2020 was a pretty tough year, without any doubt. No one expected the coronavirus pandemic. Eventually came, and then there was a lockdown, which affected a lot of businesses. Some businesses are yet to recover. Of course, the government will have work on its hands in terms of trying to inject funds into businesses or saying where they have been hurt in 2020 and then seeing how they could recover in 2021. Given the growth rate that we've seen displayed on the screen there just before that report was taken away, how would you say, in your experience, especially working in the manufacturing sector, and there's plenty of stories around the manufacturing sector, even the papers this morning are dealing heavily with what is happening in the manufacturing sector. How would you say that you have fared, your sector has fared, given where we're coming from in 2020?
Well, thank you again for having me. The year 2020 was a particularly tough year, like you said. And thanks to the way the federal government managed the COVID-19 pandemic, it minimized what would have been a calamitous situation for the manufacturers. Some of our sectors were able to operate even in 2020. But 2021 came with, I think, some form of relief because the lockdown that we saw in 2020 gave way to some openings. And so manufacturers were able to resume manufacturing in some sense. However, the dislocation that the international logistics has caused didn't allow that effective takeoff. But we noticed in the third, and as we are in the fourth quarter now, we are able to see some measure of increase, particularly in capacity utilization. We are now able to access raw materials, particularly those that are available locally. But then the challenge with Forex has really dealt a big blow on our capacity to import those raw materials that are not locally available. On the average, I think we have seen capacity utilization move from like 52-53% in the first quarter of the year to 58% in the third quarter and going into the fourth quarter. We have also seen situations where manufacturers are beginning to take back all those that had to be laid off in the advent of COVID-19. We've also seen a situation where manufacturers are able to leverage on some of the incentives, and I think we could talk about that later, some of the incentives that government has given to stimulate the economy. Whether or not that has been largely successful, I think we can talk about, but in some ways, some of our members have been able to access it. So for me, I would say it's a mixed bag. We are yet to fully recover from COVID-19, but we have seen some light at the end of the tunnel.
That's definitely good to note, especially since it's the manufacturing sector, and that's where the jobs are. A lot of jobs are in, and that's supposed to in the secondary tier. But let me come to you now. What did government perceive to be its primary task, given where we're coming from in the year 2020?
Okay, thank you very much again for having me. I think that everybody knows that the COVID-19 pandemic was devastating. And the first thing that was thought about it was that it was a purely health-related crisis, but we saw the knock-on effect on the economy. So the most important thing was to ensure that you mitigate that shock, You target jobs, so safeguarding jobs and creating new jobs, also attempting to boost local production. So the economic sustainability plan, as it were, was the federal government's response to COVID-19, which attempted to remediate a lot of the problems that we had seen from COVID-19. So if you look at some of the programs within the economic sustainability plan, there was huge support for MSMEs. So in terms of the payroll support scheme, where the federal government stepped in for 3 months to provide support for various MSMEs. Also, there was artisan grants, transport grants. Also, there were bigger programs that were real sector measures, such as the Solar Niger program, which is envisioned to provide access to power to 5 million households. That has the effect of providing power as well as providing job opportunities, because a lot of the production in the Solar Niger program is local, as well as the Family Homes Fund. There's support for building low-cost housing. So a lot of these interventions are targeted at providing jobs, which we know that if there's a reduction in unemployment, we'll see a lot of growth in the economy.
I do know that oftentimes when the federal government has a host of these programs, the issue is making sure that the people who really need them get them. How were they targeted?
Okay, so a lot of these programs there were portals for most of these programs. So for the MSME support programs, there was a portal that was created that enabled various SMEs across the different geopolitical zones to apply for these payroll support, for the artisan support. So it was a very well thought out program. It was thorough, and we believe that a lot of the people that needed the support got the support.
Okay. I don't know whether you can confirm that. Did your people need support in the manufacturing sector, and how supportive would you say the federal government was?
Yes, I think, like you said, Danny, we need to discuss that, because there are two ways: support to individual in the households, and then support to the manufacturing sector in order to help them to cope with it. There are quite a number of those, especially those channeled through the CBN, called the stimulus package. Even by the admission of the CBN itself at that time, only about 30% of the 1 trillion naira that was given to support productivity was given. There were issues about assessing those ones. We may not put it in the doors of the CBN, but with the banks that were finding it extremely difficult. And I think we actually suspected some deliberate bureaucratic bottlenecks that were put in place not to allow those who have been targeted, especially the manufacturers, to access. I think we did actually contact the CBN, quite frankly, and then the idea was that we could work with them to ensure that we track those that have applied and those that have been able to benefit from those funds. Currently, talks are ongoing with the CBN to see how we could scale up. I mean, because having just 300 million out of 1 trillion naira, and manufacturers are quite needing for those things, because like I said, we are only recovering from the setbacks that we had in 2020.
What is the challenge? Why is it so difficult to get access to the funds?
Well, I think there are, it started with the commercial banks saying that they didn't have clarity on the process from the CBN. And then you go to the CBN, and then the CBN tells you that, of course, that they have put in those pressures. I think there was just reluctance to give to the manufacturer. And we did ask for us to know those that have assessed it. We've written severally, actually, to the CBN. But talks are on now, and I think the CBN itself is setting up a committee and have asked us to send a nomination to be able to facilitate this type of exchanges. I think in future, that's what is critical for me in this matter. When such funds are going to be made, we should include the stakeholders, those that are supposed to benefit from it, so that one, they can give advice even to government, and those that are needing, we could certify those that are genuine manufacturers, and we could vouch for their capacity to behave well when these things come. I think there is that need.
Yeah, one would have thought immediately that when these kinds of things are available, when these kinds of supports are available, that the people that will be reached out to will be organizations like yourself, which already will have like a database of its own people and will certainly be able to vouch for. Did you have to reach out, or you were reached out to?
We had to reach out, unfortunately.
Okay, that's a little, perhaps, I guess, something that, government will have to work on in future. But I do not know what the thinking, is in government. I do know that there's been a lot of work around the ease of doing business, which is something I will speak on later. I know that, there's also the talk around the port, which not just manufacturers now, but also importers, deal with. We still know that we're still largely import dependent. Then there was also AFTA, which was signed. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the acronym right. But then, there were fears around that, but we eventually said it's a challenge that we can meet because we can ramp up production in-house. And even though we're looked at as the market, we can also exploit our own markets and exploit markets nearby. So it would seem that even though 2020 was some sort of setback, there was a lot of opportunity coming into 2021. How would you say that we have maximized the opportunities that 2021 presented?
That's a very, very good and loaded question. I think that we have done a good job in terms of maximizing the opportunities that we had in 2021, as is evident in the moderate growth that we have seen in the GDP over the 2021 period. You can also see that inflation is trending downwards, which is always a good thing. So in terms of their concerted efforts on the fiscal and the monetary areas to ensure that we get the best out of the Nigerian economy. Unfortunately, the assumption was that by this time, the coronavirus would no longer be lingering, but unfortunately we are seeing Omicron and the Delta variants also come through in the 2021 period, which has still caused oil price volatilities. They're still maintaining production quotas for oil in the OPEC plus areas. So in terms of, it's not been a perfect year, but I believe that a lot of the moderate growth and a lot of the positive trends in the macroeconomic indicators show the concerted effort of the federal government.
To be very honest, when I saw the positive reports in terms of growth, I was a little skeptical, and I thought that using 2020 as the base year perhaps wasn't given a very true picture as to how much progress we had made. That perhaps 2019, which was a year where we had some normalcy, will provide a better picture. Was it seen that way in government as well?
So when you're looking at economic comparisons, you can do a year on year, you can do a month on month. It's not a guarantee that if you do minus 6.1%, the year-on-year change on that will be 5% in the next year of that same quarter. So there are definitely efforts that need to be made in order to move the economy in the right direction. So base effect, yes, but it's also not a guarantee that you get to positive growth. So using 2020 as a base year, it's also important because we went through that economic recession, however so brief, and it was the efforts that the federal government made that helped us move away from recession. So I wouldn't be too concerned about the extra concerns.
Well, what's your reading? Because for a number of people, they thought, oh, this is a pat on the back. The economy is growing at 5%, wow, or at 4%, wow. But then, sometimes we tend to forget what year we're comparing it against. And 2020 wasn't exactly the most wonderful of years, economically speaking, and even speaking in terms of health. Well, I don't know what the reading is and what were the immediate challenges you wanted addressed the moment you got into 2021 and restrictions were lifted.
Yes. Okay, thank you. I think I understand his standpoint.
Indeed.
And it's always good for you to look back to the immediate period that you can. But there's also a lot of sense in not being carried away by the steep growth we are having in 2021. It should be expected that once you free the economy to operate, we'll witness some vigor in terms of, but we in MAN, for instance, have tended to compare 2019 with 2021 because only 2 out of our 10 sectors operated almost throughout 2020. The food and beverage and the pharmaceuticals. I mean, because they were producing essentials that even government itself wanted us to come out with. And I mean, for at least for about 4 to 5 months, most of the other 8 sectors were locked down. So it made more sense for us to compare. And immediately we overcame, let me use the word, the challenge of 2020. We needed government to immediately free the economy, so to say, to operate. We wanted our immediate challenges addressed, particularly our capacity to import raw materials that are not locally available, which was effectively shut down almost throughout 2020. We also wanted increased action in terms of local sourcing of those raw materials for government to incentivize those areas. Then we wanted a very urgent resolution of the gridlock at the port and the, paralyzing distortions inside the port itself. The capacity to clear your goods, the infrastructure to allow you to clear your goods, and also the payment of demurrage that emerged out of no fault of the importing manufacturers.
So speak a little more to that, because just 2 weeks ago I had an interview with the Minister of Transport on that particular issue just 2 weeks ago on a sister program, and he said that it just came to his knowledge what was happening, even though he was blaming terminal operators for that, that customs only recently went to, they're doing, is it Eclearance now or is it e-papers, something to that effect. That customs, before it was customs, but that now it is the terminal operators, and that is something they're going to be handling this week into the next. That's about this period into the new year. Has there been some traction? Are you noticing anything in that area?
Quite frankly, I have not. And I'm surprised that the Honorable Minister is just knowing. This problem has been with us for ages. And it takes, for instance, about the same amount to import a container from Singapore, to take a 40-foot container from Singapore to Apapa, than it takes for you to take your container from Apapa to Agbara, which is just 27 kilometers away. And this problem has been with us. The infrastructure, in fact, forklift, we are not able to get your containers from off the ship to bring it to the land. I don't know whether what you're referring to is the fast track clearing that enables you to take your containers and take to the factory so that you don't have delay times. But all those exist for bona fide manufacturers, for instance. But the truth of it is that you need to physically take them from the port. And when the e-clearance was introduced recently, we saw that it collapsed after about 2-3 weeks. So if there is a renewed effort by government to restart it, I think it will be a welcome development. And what we have said in all of this is, you cannot shave somebody's head in his absence. Let us take part in all these processes. The task force, the presidential task force on easing the business around the port should include the stakeholders, major stakeholders, manufacturers as stakeholders. And what we import is actually to improve productivity. So we are eminently qualified to be part of the process so that we can point to it when it is not working, so that the cumulative challenges that we have, we can lay it right at the doorstep of these committees.
Okay. Let me quickly send this to Lagos as well, because I know that Ayo has a guest. Ayo.
Well, thank you, Mark. We have Dr. Ayo Teriba with us. He joins us virtually. He's Chief Executive Officer, Economic Associates. He's a lecturer at the Nigerian University of Technology and Management in Lagos, coordinator TWG on FinSec and capital markets, national development plans. He's been a part of the National Development Plans 2021 to 2025, and he's Vice Chairman, Technical Committee, National Council on Privatization. Thank you for joining us this morning, Dr. Teriba. Truly appreciate your time with us this morning. Well, I would have loved to take you on, a general overview, first of all, of your assessment of our policies that have brought us thus far in this year. But I would like to begin from the financial sector. Information available says that in the second quarter of this year, the financial sector contracted by 4.5%. Despite banks' resilience, as from figures released by the NBS. But in quarter three, the financial sector is said to have expanded by 23%. Is that, for you, anything to cheer, or is just another caution point?
Well, we've seen a bit of turbulence, both in the economy and in the financial system in 2021. Never mind, we got bigger turbulence in 2020. So in a turbulent financial period, you have to carefully interpret, the financial sector growth figures, that you get. What do you make, for example, of 20% growth in the context of massive devaluation of the naira? So you have to be careful the figures you quote. If you had an environment where things are tranquil, where things are stable, domestic prices are stable, exchange rate is stable, then you can make a lot out of 20-something% growth. But where we started with an exchange rate that had been stable in the retail market at about 360 naira to a dollar, and you now have it having moved 200 naira away from that point, and then you speak about 24% growth, and then one will have to question you that what will the figure look like after you adjust for that massive devaluation.
The question. Well, yes. I mean, you've painted it. Maybe you may want to expatiate a little further, because somewhere in the business community, they will be wondering, okay, if this is not as good a news as it sounds, then what would be their fate? They have to go to these same financial institutions to get some financial instruments to do business. But then if that's the understanding from the figures that you have given us, juxtaposing the exchange rate with these growth figures that are being quoted by the NBS, then where stands the business environment or ease of doing business, so to speak?
Well, it's only saying that success stories are going to be difficult to find in a turbulent economic and financial environment. You have to be careful of illusory growth, where financial prices are not stable. You have to look at growth figures with all the scrutiny you can muster before you conclude that the economy is growing. Basically, that's the story. Regardless of where the economy has been in terms of turbulence, the answer to your question about people's fate, about fortunes, doesn't lie in the past. because the growth figures we are branding, whether it's second quarter or third quarter, or for that matter, full year 2020 compared to 2019, growth figures, I should remind you, are post-mortems. You can't do anything about them. And by the time you know what those growth figures are, it's too late to act on them. So people's faith and fortune should be pitched in a forward-looking way about, what policies are that are likely to change the reality that we are about to experience compared with the realities captured in those postmortems that you are dwelling on. So maybe we should speak more about the opportunities, like you started off, policy interventions now that could, give us better outcomes going forward.
Well,
dwelling
on Dr. Teriba,
on things that we cannot think about. Yeah,
I perfectly understand, looking forward and all, but you elders often say in your part of the nation that if you don't know what fell you, you could still fall further if you do not address them. So that's why I'm asking, are there policies that may have caused us to stumble the way you have talked about, and then these illusionary figures that you have talked about? Are there policies that brought us thus far that we should give a second look?
Right. The discussants have said enough about the challenges imposed on the economy by the pandemic and its ripple effects. And so we do not need to dwell on that anymore. The forces we have to deal with are quite severe. But the good news is that Nigeria is not dealing with those forces alone. And so many other economies around the world are withstanding those shocks better, both the shocks of the pandemic and its ripples. Nigeria is among the minority of countries that is being tossed to and fro by the predictable consequences of the pandemic. The pandemic has been with us for going to 2 years now. In February, it would have been with us for 2 years. So you can't claim that it is new. And not many other countries are giving the pandemic or its ripples as excuses. They reason up to it. And they are getting superb growth results. Many developing countries are doing quite well in spite of the pandemic, and we can join their ranks. So I think we should dwell more on the things we could have done to have made 2021 a better outcome than it has been. And how, as we have a few days into 2022, if we could get ourselves to agree on the need to do them now.
Well, Dr. Teriba, just one thing, because we may be taking a break shortly, but there was, when you talked about opportunities or things that we could have done. One of them is what some pundits would say was an opportunity we lost. A number of, there were significant travel restrictions in this year as well. Nigeria was just removed from some travel restrictions from some countries. And of course, every nation did that last year. Do you think that we may have lost an opportunity to look inward and develop our own production capacity so that we could have done more of buying Nigerian, using Nigerian, patronizing Nigerian stuff, as opposed to our previous dependence, maybe possibly so till now, on foreign or imported products?
Right. Maybe we'll have more time after the break to dwell on this. That the world, the global ecosystem of wealth creation that we have today is different from the ecosystem of the past that was centered on production. or centered on trade, you are not going to get very far, trying to emphasize production as it were. Today, it's not a question of what you produce. It's a question of whose value added is it. And so you can rev up your oil output, for example, or even manufacturing output, or even agricultural output. GDP is value added. And at the end of the day, that's why it's so much of a waste of time looking at, how much GDP has grown. You should be looking at whose value the GDP that you are reporting are. Have those values been added by Indians, by Chinese, by Europeans, by Americans, or by Nigerians? And the response that you are going to get from that is not cheery at all. That much of the values being added in manufacturing or even in agriculture, for that matter, are foreign value added.
Oh dear.
So it's not about producing more, it's about adding more value.
Well, we'll expatiate
activities that is produced on your soil.
Yeah, well, you said it the other time. We'll expatiate this a little further because, let's just take a short break. We'll be right back. There's so much to unpack from that. Thanks for staying with us. Well, Dr. Teriba, let's unpack some of the things that you said earlier, that it's not only about the production, or it's about the value, but then the process has to start from somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah, it starts from each country identifying and focusing on its assets and ensuring that the assets add as the most value they can add, whether at home or abroad. So the age of preoccupation with GDP is past. We are in the age where countries are more preoccupied with the values that their nationals add, whether at home or abroad. So you've got our agricultural space, our solid mineral space, our trading space. Go to Computer Village, littered with migrants who, by the way, add most of the value. If anyone have access to improved seedlings in agriculture, it's the foreigners, not Nigerians. If anybody has access, to technology, it's foreigners, it's not Nigerians. Or even to better financing, to cheaper credits from home, it's foreigners, not Nigerians. And the Chinatowns are not here for nothing. The spas, the chain stores are not here for nothing. So the GDP growth that you are counting and you're listing, this sector is growing, that sector is growing, whose value added it is. At the end of the day, values added by foreigners will end up in foreign countries. It's only the values added by Nigerians that stay in Nigeria, or the values added by Nigerians abroad that will come back to Nigeria. So we need to move away from production centricism, as they call it, or output centricism, towards asset centricism. And in this case, we are talking of the capacity of your nationals to add value, your own human capital. But it's not just your human capital, it's all the assets that you own, your companies, how much value are they adding compared with the values being added by foreign companies. Even your real estate, your lands, your built structures, what are they worth compared with their potential market value? So it's an age where you focus on assets, which is where output spring from. Our output, the GDP, is just a stream from assets. And so if we need to say more about our assets, and get more out of our assets, if we are going to change the fortunes of Nigerians positively, and if we're going to improve the narrative going forward. In a nutshell, we can debate it more, but in a nutshell, that's the concern. That's something that Nigeria has not managed to wake up to, which other countries, most other developing countries, are waking up to it. Are you there?
I was just saying that let me bring the conversation here to Abuja. I don't know if there's any distinction being made in that regard with what he said, that even though, yes, in some areas we seem to be making some progress, but we need to determine who is making the progress and where the ultimate proceeds of the progress will go to. I mean, as he did say, he says if it's made by foreigners, ultimately your money will end up in foreign countries, as opposed to when it's made by Nigerians. Are we also very conscious of that distinction?
So definitely Dr. Teriba is a renowned economist, so I'm not going to have a back and forth with him. That's not going to be fair. But he's made some good points around value add and who is actually bringing this value. But I think we should not lose track of lose sight of the fact that we still need to start from somewhere. We still need to have this production. So if at the moment there's data to support or evidence to support that a lot of these value adds are from foreigners, then policymakers will sit down and look at that data. But that's not the data that's available to me that I've got in my research. So it's definitely something that I guess we will take on board, probably interrogate that data a bit more and see how we can make improvements on that.
I do know that ease of business has been high of the priority of government. PEBEC only recently clocked 5, but there have been questions around security. It continues to be a going concern for many business people, whether they be in manufacturing or just they be in importing and exporting, as the case might be, just being traders. How is government taking this on, in your own opinion?
Okay, so I'm not a security expert,
Indeed.
So I can't comment too much on the security measures, but what I can comment on are the job-intensive measures that are trying to be achieved, because I believe personally that when you reduce unemployment, the attendant effects of security and crime go down. So for instance, there's an AFDB-led program called iDice, which is investing in digital and creative enterprises program, which is targeting a number of people, so providing infrastructure, so last mile broadband, off-grid power, providing finance, so early growth startup finance to startups in the digital and creative enterprises, also providing skills and development. And this is something that I believe will reduce unemployment drastically going forward. Also, there's the UNDP Jubilee Fellows Program, which is essentially a learn as you earn program where people with certain skills are going to be employed in certain host organizations. And this was commissioned by His Excellency President Buhari in August 2021. So we'll see the first deployment of fellows in April 2022. So I believe that if we continue to do our labor-intensive measures and continue to push a reduction in unemployment, I think that we'll see the effects across the board.
Well, as Mr. Teriba did say, a review is more or less the post-mortem. But, there are opportunities ahead of us. I'm sure a lot of people will be looking to take them as we go into 2022, even though there's also anxiety, because 2022 is a political year. As somebody in the manufacturing space, what are your projections for 2022, and what would you want government to beam its searchlight?
Okay. I think... First to Dr. Teriba, I think he has brought in a new dimension to to the conversation that is going on about how we should look at our performance and so on, and it's worth interrogating. I think, in fact, because I know him personally, I'm going to call him after this show to really expatiate on it, because we really need to be productive in Nigeria. And I will see how, one, they should not be mutually exclusive. I mean, the aspect he's thinking about should not be taken forgetting the need for us to ramp up production. So I think there has to be some realignments of the issues. But back to what you asked, I think there are quite a number of immediate things that we would like government to do even before we get into 2022. There are current efforts by government to increase taxes, and the Honorable Minister have made it very clear that somewhere in the middle of next year, we are going to have increases taxes. I think that is ill-advised. When we compare our tax rates with some other countries, and I think we should take this going into year 2022, we say it is low, and so the normal thing or the thing you expect is for us to increase our taxes. Very simple example. What is done is to compare the tax rate to GDP. And then you say in Nigeria, here it is 6.1, and he is the economist. I'm sure he will correct me if I'm wrong. And in Norway, it is 39%. In Singapore, it is about 13%. But in Norway, for instance, education is free to university. In Singapore, 100% access to water and electricity. In Nigeria, it is not so. So, implicitly, I pay tax in so many areas. In terms of supplying myself electricity, in terms of supplying myself water, in terms of sending my children to school, I pay implicit tax on those. So you can't compare the rates. The amendment of the Finance Act will actually take this into consideration. Also in terms of excise, already the people are poor and disposable income is dwindling, is badly impacted. You cannot continue to increase excise duty on goods and expect that the Nigerians' welfare will be better. There's currently an effort to do that on carbonated drinks and even cigarettes and tobacco products. Because if you continue to increase taxes on those, thinking that you get money, you open rooms, for instance, on tobacco, on illicits, and all the negative social consequences that comes with it. Also in terms of manufacturing, when you put our goods in the country out of the reach of the common man, it worsens our competitiveness. So going into 2022, we see government not increasing taxes at all. I mean, that is very easy to do. I can tell you so many things, improve electricity and some of those we've been advocating for more than a decade. So it's just the same. But there are immediate things that we need to do. The amendment going into the Customs Act, it should not take customs away from the Ministry of Finance, where the economic situation can influence how tariff is used. I mean, and it has to come under the direct supervision of government. It cannot become a paramilitary organization, or it cannot be solely revenue generating machine. It has to facilitate trade. That's what is done all over the world. So in terms of our expectation for next year, I think these are immediate steps that we can avoid making a mistake even before we get into 2022.
I think I will have to leave it there for this discussion. I know that, we'll certainly expand it in 2022 as we go into that year. Hopefully there will be time for a lot of economic talk as well as some political talk as well. But we have to thank you, gentlemen, for coming on Sunrise Daily this morning. Mr. Segun Ajayi Kadir is the Director General, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, and Somkele Awakalu is Special Assistant to the President on Economic Research in the Office of the Vice President. Gentlemen, once again, thank you for coming on Sunrise Daily.
Thank you very much.
Let me quickly throw this to Ayo now to wrap up our guests virtually.
Well, thank you, Markwell. Well, Dr. Teriba, well, there's so much to say, but as you know, we really don't have that much time. But there's something that I would like you to speak to just before we call it a morning, is the issue of micro, small, and medium enterprises. What would be your projections or expectations of what government should do to encourage them in the year 2022, given that they contribute significantly to the GDP and especially the employment figures?
All right. Well, very briefly, as I see that we're wrapping up. Well, one thing you can do to strengthen the MSMEs is to strengthen their cooperatives. That government should adopt a cooperative-based model of engaging them. What they cannot do individually, they become strong enough to do when you engage them collectively. So you could think of, giving them access to information, access to technology, to skills through cooperatives. So the self-help mechanism can amplify the things that government is doing, including even access to financial support. Rather than dealing with them individually, it's about time to organize them into cooperatives, and preferably digitally as well. Give them some digital existence and let them engage with the government digitally and engage themselves digitally. In a nutshell, that's the much I suggest.
Well, there is so much to say, Dr. Teriba. I hope that the next time we have you, we'll be able to bring you into the studio so that we can have more time to talk about some of these issues. But we have to thank you very much for your time this morning. Dr. Ayo Teriba is Chief Executive Officer, Economic Associates, is a lecturer at Nigeria University of Technology and Management, Lagos, coordinator TWG, the Technical Working Group on FinSec and Capital Markets for the National Development Plan of 2021 to 2025, and is Vice Chairman, Technical Committee, National Council on Privatization. Thank you so much this morning for being a part of our program.
Thank you.
All right. So we're back after now to take on another issue that is of significance, especially in 2022. Stay with us.